Technology agrees with us on this nice morning. We're going to first do the tumbler bins, and I'm going to bring up a video for that. The first one will be our system, which is a Mantis system, and nothing really fancy about it. And actually, after seeing uh, Nancy's system, I'm sort of jealous because I really like what she's got. But our system we've had for several years, and it is a simple functioning tumbling drum. The downside is, in my opinion, is one, it's not insulated on the inside, and the other is that it's susceptible to rain leaking in, which makes the compost soggy. Both of those things in the second video we'll see are addressed in Nancy's system. So without further ado, I will start the Hi, I'm Will Lockwood, and I'm going to talk to you a bit about our drum composting system. This is a double drum system made by Mantis. I think we paid about $250 for it, but I think it's about twice that now. It works by loading up the drum as you get garden produce, waste, etc., and you just fill up a side and balance it out with some brown material, and then give it a spin. And you do that a few times, and maybe about once every other day or once every few days. And you can keep on adding as you do it. And even after you stop adding to it, you want to keep rotating it for aeration of the pile. But in about 6 to 8 weeks, you end up getting some very nice compost. Let me open up and show you a bit. So it's nice, kind of leaf moldy. I see a worm in here. I have no idea how worms are getting in here, but they have found it. Um, and it has almost no odor. Um, I can see some broken down leaf mold, etc. in it. See, it's nice and very rich color. And when I'm ready to use the compost, it's as simple as I roll a wheelbarrow underneath it and I rotate the drum forward until this hopper just drops right into the wheelbarrow. And it's that simple. And that's so this is all ready to use compost. This is compost in the works on this side, and that's the other advantage of having the double drum is that you can have one batch that is curing or composting and the other one that you're adding to and building on. We throw pretty much all garden waste in it and home food scraps, etc. But we do balance it out with our worm bin, which gets enough to keep the worms fed and happy. Now, let me see if I have here. So the process is brain dead simple. It's you just keep on throwing in your green material, and then balance it out with browns. And that's probably the toughest thing for me at this point is getting enough brown material to balance out the green. I probably will need to start collecting more leaves, scrap, and then store them so that I can have a ready supply throughout the summer. But you could, I've thought of using getting straw, or I could even get a block of coir and use that and try to keep it going. But this is really a low maintenance system, and I have to admit it's sort of easy to sort of set it and forget it. So that's the beauty of it, and I don't fuss with it a great deal. Uh, but I don't add anything to the compost, but I've been thinking about that after talking with Ken Miller. I might try adding some azomite to it or other amendments. We don't put any dairy in here, or any fish or meat scraps or anything like that, but we do put eggshells in it, crushed eggshells in it, and that seems to be helpful. And uh, you really have to watch the moisture in these. Normally, I don't have to add any moisture or any water whatsoever. There's enough that comes from the greens to not do anything. In the wintertime, it actually gets to be a problem due to the rains. So what I will be doing this fall for stuff that I haven't used is I will probably sift and bag the compost and put it away for springtime amendments. And why I chose this method, well, basically because it's lazy. I have a 3 bin system over here, but it turned out to be a disaster. For one, it was a lot of work to turn it. And then when in spring we went to go use our compost, it all broken down. We found that our local redwood tree had completely taken over the compost. It was one big root ball. So this is nice. It can't be attacked by trees or by rodents. We don't have any rodent problem whatsoever with this. I have found in here a frog, and I have no idea how they got in there. And we do see worms in here, and we have no idea how they get in there. They're a little dizzy from spinning, but they seem to be happy. Let's see. It works best so in the summer and during warm weather, like most composting systems. And it does produce a fair volume of compost between the 2 bins. We have enough for our 10 beds out here. I don't usually have to buy compost unless I'm doing a really serious renovation or a new bed that I'm starting. But overall, it's a simple, easy system to use. The only maintenance I do on it is oiling of the bearings. And I did have to replace the hinges on this with some stainless steel hinges. They used to go in these holes here, but they were just metal tabs, and eventually they rusted off. But other than that, it's been maintenance free. It's easy to do. It's easy for my wife to operate, or me, without a lot of challenge. So not a bad system. And if you're lazy, it just out right. Very good. So
Thank you, Will.
hopefully you could hear that.
It sounded good on my end. Do we have any questions for Will about his system specifically? You can either send them through the chat or you can raise a hand and I will try to find you. I see Tom is raising his hand. You could unmute, Tom.
To do that. Okay.
There we go.
There we go. You can hear me now.
Yes.
So we have just one question that came in from the chat. Again, I'll be managing any chat questions. Eve wanted to just have a piece of information repeated, which is how long it took for the compost to be done.
In ideal circumstances with the right blend, about 6 to 8 weeks, or about a couple months. In the winter, it's much slower. And I'm thinking of this winter of trying to put a tarp over it to keep things drier to see if I can make it work better.
Okay, and there are now some questions streaming in, so I'll pass them on to Will. If anybody who's asking the question feels the need to elaborate, that'll be fine. Let's see, Lavinia wanted to know if you did in fact say that this process did not work well during the winter, and was it because of a lack of heat? The drums are not insulated. This is a mantis system, and yeah, I think because the drums are not insulated, that inhibits good compost production. It still works. I've got to get past the rain making the compost soggy problem first to see how well it'll work once that is solved. So that's my goal this winter, is to get that problem solved, and then I can see how it works. But it still does compost in the winter. It's much slower. Let's see. And I don't know what the capacity in cubic feet of tumbler is, but if you go to the Mantis website, they still sell it. It's fairly large. I mean, it's generous. It's a big composter. And let's see.
And Mantis would be a sufficient brand name to know to be able to track down the system?
If you looked up Mantis Tumbler Composter, and while the next video is playing, I'll see if I can come up with a link for it.
Okay, and there was a comment from Debbie saying that it seemed like it did make enough compost for your 10 garden beds. Would that be fair to say, or did you have another source of compost that supplemented this rotating bin?
That's fair to say, but our beds are well established, so they're really just getting a top dressing. If you were starting out with fresh beds, we have other garden beds besides the raised beds, and I have bought supplemental compost for them. So, but for a, you know, our beds are pretty big, so it's a relative thing to the health of the beds to start with.
Okay, and Debbie wanted to know what means you use to move compost from one side to the other of the bin, of the rotating bin.
Oh, I don't move it from one side to the other.
Okay.
I simply, once it is filled up, and then I just don't, open up that door on that side, and I start filling up the other side. So I just alternate between the side.
Okay, and for those not following the chat, I should add that Steve has put into the chat a link to the Mantis website where you can check out
Great. Thank you.
the mechanism. And I think I've covered everything that was asked, and I don't see anything more coming in, Will.
All right.
Nancy.
Well, shall we then go along to a more sophisticated tumbler composting system? This is Nancy's system.
I should interject. The system is sophisticated. The user is quite a beginner. So, yeah, go ahead, Will.
Well, it's a well-chosen system, and if I did it from scratch again, I would seriously look at it. However, to get the capacity that our system has, it's about an $800 system. So it's not inexpensive, but it is very, very nicely made.
Yeah, and ours, just to clarify, ours is the more the mid-sized one,
right,
that you will be seeing in the next video.
Right.
So
okay, let's try it again.
Excuse me, right? Okay.
Okay, so we're rolling, and we're at the home of Nancy O'Connor, and we're here to look at her tumbler composting system. So welcome. I'm glad the sun came out for us.
It's a beautiful day.
Yeah.
Yes.
So why don't you tell us what you have here and what type of system is and how it works and what you do with it.
All right. So this is a Zero compost system, and my husband picked it out, and he reviewed many different tumbler models, and we wanted something that would be easy, convenient, that we could have close to the kitchen, and that wouldn't attract rodents. I had some concerns that it might leak and attract yellow jackets, but it has never done that. No problems at all. So we love it. We're a family of 3. We put all of our food scraps in here, including meat products, and it works great. So the way it works is you open up, you do one side at a time. So
there's 2 separate chambers.
Yes, there are 2 separate chambers, and this is the side we are currently using. One thing that we do like about this, it is insulated. I don't know if you can see the insulation there. And so it really heats up in there. It gets to 160 degrees, apparently. I have not measured it. So we feel that really helps. We just throw everything in. Our son does this for us. Fill up the compost bin in the kitchen, bring it out every day or 2, depending on what we're eating. And because we're mostly doing food waste in there, we add kind of a sawdust material. We were using straight sawdust when the forest tours were open, but we don't have a source right now. We had some trees we had to take down, and so these are the shavings from that. They're working fairly well. I'll show you on the other side. we had bigger shavings that didn't work quite as well. So you add the stuff, you add the wood material, and you close her up.
And what's the ratio that you typically are working, try to measure out?
You know, you kind of try to balance, but given that our son is doing it, I'm not sure how accurate it is. Oh, I should notice, it does not smell. I mean, it really doesn't smell. It smells like dirt, and there's all kinds of stuff in here. So if I come out myself and I notice that it's maybe looks a little goopy or stinky, I'll add a couple
Add some wood chips.
extra wood chips. But generally he does a pretty good job, and it's just a matter, yeah, we try to do kind of 1 for 1. So so you load that up, and then you give it a spin, and it's really quite easy to do. And you bring it back around again, and then you're ready for the next load. So after this fills up, we would lock that up and leave it alone and move to the next side. So this side is the one that's been sitting, and you know, it really varies a lot, but maybe every 3 weeks or so, maybe a month or so, that we'll switch over to the other side and leave this one to sit. This one, and you can see it breaks down a lot because this was quite full, and it really breaks down. What I wanted to show was that we used more wood shavings in this batch from the tree cuttings, and it doesn't break down as much. Now it still smells fine, and the food material's broken down, but it's not a very pretty compost. But I will still use this up in the vegetable garden, or if I'm digging in a bed. I wouldn't use it to top dress because it doesn't look very pretty, but the plants love it. So
do you have any trouble in the winter with rain making it soggy, or?
we do not.
That's great.
We do not.
That's
You come out in the winter and the steam just comes out of this thing.
Wow.
It's working away.
So the insulation seems to help, and the ceiling seems to work pretty
It
good.
does. Yeah, it really does.
And-
there are air vents on the sides, and nothing comes out of those when you spin it. It's quite interesting.
Do you add any water to it?
We do not. No, we never add water.
Okay.
Because I think the food products we're putting in have
Less
enough
moisture.
water to them. So we're adding the wood to kind of help dry it out.
Do you add any other amendments? Fertilizer, soil, minerals?
We do not.
Biochar.
We are not very sophisticated with this. We just add the 2 components, and it comes out. And so we're kind of beginners, really. I mean, but we've had this system now for 4 years.
Oh,
probably.
but you're veterans then.
But in the gardening world, there are people who are much more sophisticated about this, but this kind of serves the purpose. We take our trash to the transfer station, and so it saves a lot of trips as well, in addition to creating nice soil for our garden.
Right. Yeah, it's a win-win situation.
Yeah.
All right. And how long before you actually are robbing it? Do you let it cure then for another month, or?
So this one I won't empty until this one is full.
Well,
And
so a month or
just
so, or
wait.
2?
Well, maybe a month. It depends. I mean, now with COVID, they're filling up more quickly because we're here more. But I don't think we really have a set schedule. A lot depends on how. Like in here, we've got some corn husks and things that were bulkier because corn season. So, maybe that filled up a little bit quicker, but
Yeah,
we
very
don't
good.
have a set schedule, just whenever they fill up.
And was there any other specific reasons why you chose this system?
I think that the insulation was supposed to be good. The fact that it's pretty bomb-proof, that we've never seen a rodent around here. It's easy to tumble. It's easy to open up. We don't have to turn anything or layer anything. It's easy. And
Yeah.
so we do use it. We use it every day.
Right. I think
Um,
that's a big
yeah.
factor. Convenience is really important.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so once you're all done with the compost, how do you get it up to the garden?
So we have the garden cart,
Uh-huh.
and you just roll it under, and you tilt this, and you open it up, and you can dump it right in.
Right.
It's better to do as a two-man process because that keeps us
One
in
person, yeah.
position. Yeah, but it's really pretty handy.
Nice. Yeah, very quick and easy and clean.
Yes.
Good. Well, let's go look at the compost.
All right.
And here is the final product, beautiful compost that is now ready to be taken into the garden. And this is behind Nancy, the beautiful garden. We still have some raspberries out there too.
Yes, we do. They are persisting, which
Yeah,
is fun.
yeah, they look great.
You can have a cup.
I'll be happy to try them. So this basically is, you can see the material in it. It smells just like earth.
And it's been sitting here
It's a
for
nice friable texture.
a few weeks,
Uh-huh.
so it's gotten some rain on
Looks
it.
like an avocado.
That is an
pit, might have
avocado
been.
pit.
Coffee plug? Hard to say.
Yeah.
But-
we do put avocados in,
And some stuff like the peanut shells don't quite make it as quickly.
No,
But eventually they will break down in the garden.
right, and we do also we get some bones,
Uh-huh.
which it's okay to put them in there because all the organic comes off, and then you can just throw these out. So
Or put them in the ground. And let
yeah,
them-
break down further.
Yeah, break down further. Yeah.
So it's not the prettiest stuff out there, but we had a lovely garden, and
Yeah, I can see the garden really likes it.
plants are happy.
And that's what's important. All right, well, thank you very much. This is a beautiful spot, and we're very pleased to have seen your tumbler system.
We're happy to share it, and we hope it'll inspire somebody else to start one.
Great. Thank you, Nancy.
So, thank you, Nancy. I think you've revealed that you have a new career possible in product advertisement on TV. Nice job.
I think I need to get my COVID haircut before I go that direction, but
So to enter some of the chat questions and comments into the audio record here, I should note that Lavinia asked about storing any completed compost, if you can, and what to do with it. And it was answered by, let's see. Anyway, it was answered that yes, Diane said that yes, you can store it as needed somewhere else once it's completed in the rotating bin. Ken had asked about problems with rust with either devices, and it was answered by Will that both of the products, the Mantis one and the one you have, are powder coated, and that rust is really not an issue. After 20 years, Will had only some minor rust on some of the door tabs. And he commented, Nancy, that yours is even better built than his was. Let's see. Ken had a couple of comments. One for Nancy, that putting your wood chips of any style out to be exposed to be weathered before you put them into the bin could help in the degree to which they decompose and contribute to the compost. Let's see. Ken also notes that he's takes pits and bones and chars them before they get put into the compost. Let's see what else. A couple new things have come in here. Jeannie has a question about using kitchen scraps and whether the system gets hot enough to kill potential meat pathogens, which also then raises the question, Nancy, do you only put vegetable matter in there, or do you put animal matter in there as well? And I'll leave that as a question for you right now.
okay, great. We put animal matter in there as well. We put in meat, eggshells, everything. And we have not tested it for pathogens. The system on the website clearly says that this is okay to do because the heat generated in it It's supposed to get up to 160 degrees. As I had mentioned, we have never actually tested the heat, but if you open it up, it steams. I mean, you actually see steam coming off of it. So I guess we're going on faith with that. We do let the compost cure a bit. It After I empty it into the garden cart, I mean, sometimes it's just a matter of time. It will take me a week or two before I actually put it anywhere. And I don't put it around my actively growing vegetables right away. I put it into, and I guess honestly, that's just been happenstance that we built our beds. We did one of those lasagna gardens where you do the layers of the compost and the wood chips. And so we built those beds and applied that compost at least a month before we had any actual vegetable plants in there. So we haven't gotten sick. I guess I can tell you that. We haven't had any, health issues from using it. But as far as any actual testing, we haven't done anything like that. I'm not sure how you do that. Will?
Actually, Jeannie brings up a very good point. Um, and when in doubt, hold off. Um, it's important to get in a composting system that you're concerned about killing pathogens. It's important that it get hot enough. And if you don't have a thermometer to check it, or if you're kind of lazy or you don't get your mix correctly, so it's mostly just kitchen scraps and maybe you don't get wood chips or leaves or some brown in there, and it doesn't get hot enough, there's the potential for a problem. So if you're concerned about that, then the safest thing to do is just don't put them in there. Uh, it's why you will see certain recommendations on certain composting systems to do this. If you do it correctly, then and you do get a bed up to specific temperatures for a specific length of time, then they will kill all the pathogens. And this is even to the point where there are on island people that are composting human manure. If it is done correctly and safely, it can, but you need to be responsible to do something like that. So the guiding, if you're new to this or if you're lazy and kind of like sometimes I'm going to pay attention, I'm not, just don't put that stuff in there. It's the safest thing to protect yourself. But it's pretty rare to hear about people having problems with compost. But again, you know, you should be protecting your own self. One thing they do warn against is using any sort of pet manure or kitty litter or anything like that, because there are some fairly dangerous pathogens that can come over from pets. So that's definitely not recommended. But we haven't been doing meat scraps. We're not heavy meat eaters, but I'm considering trying it in our the Mantis composter once I get the wetness problem solved, because that's a sealed system, so I don't have to worry about rodent incursion, which would be the other concern if you have meat or stuff in there. And that it's very attractive to raccoons and rats.
Okay, there are two questions that follow up on this, and then I'll go back deeper into the chat to pick up another thread. So it is asked if Nancy has concluded or if there's testing that can be done to make sure that this system is warm enough during the winter as well as during the summer. And that was from Lavinia. And then Diane was wondering what kind of disease problems are we talking about after all here that might be caused by having, I guess, undecayed meat scraps. So there's two questions there. Is it warm enough in the winter? And what are the diseases that we could be dealing with here?
Well, yet again, we have not tested the temperature, but we read on the website what this system was able to do, on the instructions for the system. And they say that you can add meat products, animal products. So we follow the directions on it, you know, how to operate it. So I guess, like I said, we're going on faith that if it's supposed to be able to do this, and if we follow the procedures, that we should be fine. Um, the fact that when you open it in the winter, you will literally see steam pouring out of this thing. I guess we've taken that as a good sign that it's working, that it's generating heat. Um, and the fact that when the compost is done, even though we might find a bone from like ribs, something that has, you know, a big bone in it, um, it never smells bad. We never see any, you know, bits of meat of any sort. And in fact, chicken bones are completely gone. Those never show up at all. The only bone that we'll be likely to see is a rib bone, because my guys like ribs once in a while. Um, but yeah, as far as tests, and I don't really know as far as diseases. Will, do you have?
Yeah, I could comment on that. And just to as an example of how efficient proper composting is and how efficient the microorganisms are, I visited a it's a community composting system up on Lopez Island that serves the whole island, and it's an agricultural composting system. So it's actually on a working farm. He has pigs and he has cattle, and he has pretty good sized piles. I think up to 600 cubic yards, but it's not a gigantic system. But it gets hot enough so that, as an experiment, one year before he transferred the piles um, to cook and cure, he put the entire guts from a full cow or beef cattle in the pile and then buried it and let it cook. And he's got thermocouples in there measuring the temperature like that. When he went and turned the pile, he said a few weeks later, it was all gone. It had completely disappeared. He couldn't find a trace of it. It's quite remarkable when the pile is working correctly, the activity of these microorganisms. Now, to answer Diane's question, there's a few pathogens you want to watch out for. One is a fungus, aspergillus, which is a type of mold that can form if you just are very lazy and the pile just sits static for a while and gets moldy, and that can cause some respiratory problems in some people. This can actually even happen um, with that mold can show up on like old geraniums and stuff as they're sort of rotting in from winter rot. So it is just something that's in the air and you need to be aware of. But the main bacterial pathogens are E. coli and Salmonella, and they're definitely something that you want to be sure that everything is processed thoroughly. Um, Sanitary behavior in the garden. I mean, washing your hands after you go to the bathroom, other things like that go a long ways to stopping these from showing up in a home garden. But the potential is there for them. And if you had food products that came from a farm where there was a salmonella problem, and then you kind of put it in there, you'd want it to get hot enough and destroy those pathogens. They're not common in home composting systems, but they are definitely something to be aware of. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if one was composting manures, you definitely want to be watching out for E. coli, in feces. But that's typically not done. It's not necessary to have good compost. And I think if you stick to composting known good materials, when combining wood chips together with kitchen garden scraps, and that you're pretty well assured that you're going to have a safe compost as long as you keep it active and don't space it out. And even if you do space it out, if you space it out long enough, it's going to compost on its own anyhow.
Okay, I have one short thread to put into the audio record, and then there's two questions stacked up. First of all, Debbie had asked who manufactures Nancy's composter, And Diane had responded, it's the Jora composter tumbler. So I assume the manufacturer is Jora, Jora. And as before, Steve has chimed in with a link in the chat with a link to the Jora site. There is a question out there from Amy about how Ken chars the bones and the pits that he puts into his composter. So maybe Ken has a response to that.
Ken, so we've got to unmute you. Let's see. Ken, are you able to unmute yourself? Or am I making that difficult? Let me just see.
Yeah, he's live now.
I'm alive.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks.
Or dead. I don't know. I'm not in my compost pile yet, so I'm sharp by the stoves I make, burners, whatnot. Small as 1 gallon, and my most commonly used burner now is a 7-gallon container. I make a lot of charcoal in that. Grind it up and add it to my compost. And yeah, I tried avocado pits for years. Every time I'd sift, I'd get a whole one or whatever. But I'd throw it back in, but it just never broke down. Since I've been charring, yeah, it's easy to take care of.
And one could even do it in their wood stove in a small retort made by taking a couple large cans and making one sit inside the other and poking some holes in it and just put it in the wood stove. And when it stops smoking or flames coming out of it, pull it out, and that's your char.
I do a lot of that in the winter. I have a crimper that it's like a stovepipe. You crimp it 1 can and it fits inside the other, and you don't have to put holes in it because it seeps out through the grooves crimper. And I've made a lot of charcoal with that. I know a person up in the Squim area, Port Angeles area, that made enough. They're doing a lot. They filled a 55-gallon drum barrel over winter one year. Strictly from their wood stove. So
So do we have a link to a resource on making biochar? Because this is biochar that you're talking about, and it's a whole different topic. Well, not different. I mean, it's related, but it is a pretty extensive topic. And I'm wondering if we have a resource we could send folks to that were curious to learn more.
We do have on our page, we do have a biochar page on our website, and I'll put that into the chat.
good.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you. Thank you, Ken.
You bet.
So hooking together Ken's opening statement about not being compost yet, and Debbie's statement about possibly a new policy coming for the Vashon Cemetery, we can address Eve's question about amendments that one might add to compost here. So I wonder, directly answering Eve's question, she does say that amendments have been mentioned in the past. Could you elaborate someone on the kinds of amendments that people have used and what purposes those amendments serve?
Will, that's for you because I am.
Yeah, so I'm getting a little concerned about the time. We did go over that a bit in the second session. Ken explained some of the things he used. So if we have time afterwards, can we bring this back up?
Sure. Yeah.
It's a good question, but it's not necessarily a small one. And Ken has some good information on that. So I'd like to give a good answer for that. But let's go with the next video, and then if we have 2 more videos, so let's get those taken care of because I'm sure they're going to bring up new questions too. So
yeah, sounds good. Go ahead, Will.
the next video is a short one, and it is by our board member Mary Singer, and she has a novel way of and very compact way of making
compost using worms. So we're getting away from aerobic digesting and into anaerobic digesting using the worms to do the digesting for us. But it's very effective in a compact space. And I was actually impressed by how little space it takes up. And you can even use it in your own home. You know, if you want to keep the worms warm and keep them active, in the winter. So let's roll Mary's video here. All right. So here we are with Mary Singer, and she's going to tell us a bit about her worm bin system. And why don't you go ahead and start out and explain to us what this is?
Okay, so these are my worm compost bins, and there are two separate bins here. One is full and the other is empty, and I'm going to show you how to create these. But the reason why I got started with this is that my husband and I were living on a small lot, and we just needed a place that we could get rid of our kitchen waste. And so I found this on YouTube, and it's very simple. So we are 2 people, and I have 3 bins. So right now I have 2 worm bins that are full, that are this bucket size, and then one's empty. And that seems to work for us, having 3 that we can be rotating. So the way this works is I have all my kitchen waste up here with the worms, and then underneath, this is the second bucket underneath that collects all the liquids. And you can see on this first one I made, I went up to Ace and I got this fancy little spigot, but that's really not necessary because you can just pull it out and use your liquids in the garden. So the way it is built is the bottom bucket is it really can be just a bucket. And the top bucket has holes at the bottom that I drilled, and then holes around the top. And I will point you to a YouTube video to explain that more. And then you would want to have a screen at the bottom so that all the worms and junk doesn't fall into the second bucket. And that can be like the screen from a door. I've actually used cloth and that was fine, but I would suggest using a totally natural cloth if you do that, so cotton. And it's as simple as that. And I'm sure you know from other videos that in these kinds of bins, you don't want to put citrus or onion, and obviously no meat. And the reason, besides it being really nice for a small lot, it's also really great because raccoons can't get into it. So normally this is locked down, and in our last place that we lived, we had raccoons try to get in and they couldn't get in. You aren't going to get mice or rats in it, so it's really nice and secure that way. And then after the worms finish it, you can use it in your garden.
So do you normally keep the system outdoors year-round?
I do, and it worked for me fine last year. I could imagine bringing it in and it would not release an odor. I think it would be totally fine inside. I think I could put it in my garage or even in my mudroom if I wanted to.
Mm-hmm. And then you just transfer the screen to the new bucket when you do it. And do you transfer the worms too?
You know, yeah, you would want to, thank you. You'd want to put in new worms into your new bucket.
Okay.
And get it started.
Okay. All right. And you mentioned the liquid. So do you have to mix that with water or anything when you're using it as a garden fertilizer?
Yes. Yeah, you would want to
make a tea out of it or dilute?
Yeah, I think.
Do you know what the ratio would be about?
I don't.
Okay.
Do you will?
No,
Yeah, I don't, I'm not, the reason I do it mostly is because I keep my garbage very clean, and I make sure that what goes into the garbage can is it's just trash. And so my kitchen waste either goes here and it gets processed and gets put back in the garden, or if it does not fall into those categories, or it does fall into the citrus, meat, or onion, the citrus and meat go elsewhere for composting on the property. It's not a worm bin. The meat I actually freeze. I haven't figured out a better way to deal with that. But I try to make sure that our garbage is really clean. And so that's why I do this. It's nice to have for our garden, but my primary reason is to process the kitchen waste.
And how long after the worms are done or the bucket's full and it's been transferred, do you let it post-compost or kind of still work?
Yeah, I haven't really had to make a very scientific process out of this because my 3 bins work fine. This is pretty close, and honestly, I don't know how long it's been working. It's just, maybe this is 6 months old. I'm not sure.
Okay. And you just then mix the final product after it's had a chance to sit for a bit right into the garden.
I do, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the only thing that maybe people wouldn't like to see as much as the eggshells. So you could do something else with the eggshells, maybe grind them up so that it's...
Yeah, we just crush them down.
Yeah, we do that a little bit. I don't really worry about it. I don't worry about how it looks.
Right.
I think that, it's buried and who cares?
And have you had any trouble once it is buried with animals digging it up?
No, not yet.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, it's been fine.
Good. And we'll put on the YouTube video link after this. I'll put it on this video. Are there any other suggestions you would have for people doing this process? I mean, for 2 people, you fill up a bucket. About how long does it take to fill it up? About?
Oh, I don't know, maybe six months.
Takes 6 months to fill it up.
Yeah, we might
Wow.
be really good with our kitchen waste.
Wow. Yeah.
I'm not sure. Obviously, I don't pay attention to all of the details.
Well, it's elegant. It's simple, and it's self-contained, which is really nice for anybody
Yeah.
who doesn't have a lot of room or doesn't want a lot of muss and fuss.
No, it's super easy, and there are plenty of free buckets on the island. So,
Right. Good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. This looks like a great system for anybody that wants to get started on worming. It's simple and neat. And the results, are you happy with the results when you've seen
Yeah.
the soil?
No, it's great. And in fact, I built this when we were on a smaller lot. I will keep this up because it is easy. I can have 3 bins going at once and just rotate from one to the next. I don't need to worry about the critters. So this now is my preferred method.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mary. It's been fun seeing this new process, and I wish you good success in gardening.
All right, thank you.
Right.
Go ahead,
Go
Mary.
ahead, Tom. No, I was just going to invite questions.
Oh, okay, so we do have a couple of questions built up here. 2 of them on timing. They may have been addressed, but maybe they could be quickly addressed again. How long it takes to compost, and maybe more specifically here, when Mary stops adding material, and then how long from when you've stopped adding material to when the worms are done with it, in your opinion, and it's time to switch bins?
You know, what you may have gathered from that video is that this is not a scientific process, and I am not a super scientific person. And so I honestly don't know. I throw it out there, it does its thing, maybe 6 months later, it's good. Will, you might have a an answer.
Well, I haven't done this, so I can only, go on our own worm bin. And quite honestly, we don't time it either because we normally don't rob our worm bin except in spring.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, I would let people kind of explain this to us. There is a good web link about this, which I provided. And there is also some on that website, many good different discussions on composting and vermicomposting, which is worm composting. Um, so you might get a little more information from that, but we never rush our worms. We just kind of we take it when we need it, which is typically in springtime only. That's the only time I rob it. So um, I haven't ever hustled it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And Debbie also asked Mary, do you buy your worms, or what is the source of your worms?
You know, when I got them a long time ago, I actually went out to Facebook and somebody was offering them. So if you're on Facebook and you go to a site like Vashonites, you can easily find somebody that's willing to share. So Ken, maybe one person. I just saw his hand go
Yeah,
up.
there's a lot of people that have worm bins or composting systems that worms have moved in. Thank you very much. And when they've moved in and they're happy, there's thousands of them in there. So it's not a big deal to give a cup of them to help somebody else start out.
Yeah.
And I think on that point, Jeannie puts out there an interesting statistic that 6 pounds of worms can compost about 6 pounds of kitchen scraps per week.
Wow.
All right.
Debbie had a question about the buckets, about the size of the top bucket versus the bottom one. Those look like painting buckets, and so I think they are tapered, which
Mhm.
means you can stack 2 buckets of the same size, one on top of the other. If that's not the case, though, maybe Mary wants to address that issue.
No, you're exactly right. Those are just paint buckets.
Yeah.
The other thing I will say is that when Will and I stopped recording, he told me that he actually puts his citrus and onions into his worm bin. And so since he told me that, I've started doing that. And Ken's nodding his head, so it sounds like that's something I thought was the case, but maybe it's not.
Well, I've seen subsequent to that recording, I started doing it, and there are definitely people that say don't do it. But the general sense I've read is just don't do it a lot. Don't overwhelm the system with a lot of a whole crop worth of garlic tops or onion tops or a few gallons worth of orange juice squeezing rinds, stuff like that. That would overwhelm it. So, and there are some worms evidently that will just simply ignore orange rinds or citrus rinds. So if you find that they're just not composting, then your worms don't like it. So don't put them in there.
Great. Okay.
And I think that's it on questions, except to note that on the chat record, Will has put in a link there about how to make composting buckets or composters from simple plastic buckets.
And the link to the spruce site is also up on our website on their compost. It's in the sidebar on the compost. And it's an excellent site that had go over many different types of composting systems. So not just worm bins. But the next video, yes, Nancy?
Hang on, I got a quick question. So Mary, this is probably really basic, but after your time period that you feel that the worms are done with your compost, do you sift the worms out of the soil before you put it in the garden, or do you just reach in, grab a handful of worms, put them in your new bucket, and then dump everybody else with the soil into the garden?
Yeah. Yeah, I moved some worms over into the new one. And then if they want to go off into the land and be happy there, then that's fine.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
And so, Nancy, I think your question and the answer to it answers Diane's question about separating worms from the finished compost. Mary is not separating them from the finished compost entirely successfully, it sounds like.
Yeah, and the same thing when we rob our worm bin, inevitably some worms get transported into the garden along with them. I just try to keep the majority of them with uh, the composting system to carry on with the next load. But we're about to see a more complex and composting system and a rule breaker who feeds their worms everything. So, with no further ado, we'll start off on Diane and Michael's composting system. And they've been doing it for quite a while, and they have managed, they have 2 bins, and they've managed to compost an enormous amount of materials. It's very impressive. So I've got to find the right one here. Okay, and now let me see if I get this shared correctly. Okay, here we are on a first day of fall, beautiful sunny day at the home of Diane Emerson and Michael Laurie, and we're here to talk about worm bins. So hello and thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks
for coming.
So why don't we start from the top in the kitchen and how you collect your compostables, and then we'll work our way to the worm bin.
So this is our little bin that we have in the kitchen, and what we like about it, I'm gonna just put it right here and open it up. So we put the scraps in there, and it's really great because there's a replaceable charcoal filter, so it doesn't smell. And when it starts to fill up, we just bring it out here and empty it into the worm bin.
I'd like to mention that one of the really nice things about this, and I hadn't seen one of these before I met Michael, is that there are no fruit flies and there are no gnats, there are no bugs with this kind of a compost collector. And that was always a problem before when I was collecting compost in the kitchen because I didn't have a good system. That's fabulous.
Right.
It's really great.
Yeah, it's got nice capacity too.
Yes, and there's a smaller one as well, but I like that size.
Yeah.
So would you like us to go ahead and empty this into the worm bin there?
Sure, and you could, while you're doing it, why don't you tell us what you feed the worms and what you don't feed the worms?
Okay, what we put in there.
Well, most of our food scraps, we don't eat meat. And so, meat, as you may know, can be a bit of a problem in composting, depending. But really, most of our food waste goes in here.
Our fish and fish bones go in there.
Yeah, so fish, we will, and some people raise that, well, maybe you shouldn't do that. We really haven't had any problems. And it's not a big dominant part of our food waste, so it seems to work fine.
How about dairy?
Yeah, old cheese that gets too moldy. Rinsing out dairy. Yeah, we don't. There's very little waste in our kitchen, but dairy can go in there. When we have no restrictions other than things that are salty.
Which was exactly where I was going to go. So I first had a worm bin when I lived in Seattle near Green Lake. I took the master composter class through Tilth, Seattle Tilth. I had a worm bin right outside my front door of my apartment, and I kept killing the worms. And I was like, well, why is this happening? And then I realized, oh my God, I've been putting salted peanut shells in there, and I believe that was what was killing them. When I stopped doing that, they thrived. It was great.
Oh, that's good to know.
So we're careful about salted peanut shells and things like that.
Yeah. Good. And then do you just dump them on top? Do you stir them in?
But before that, we also put in paper cups and paper, waste paper. We have some waste paper from a takeout in here. Pizza boxes go in here. They love cardboard. Worms love corrugated cardboard because they like to get inside those flutes. And they really like that. I don't know, I think it's protection, or they feel, I'm not sure why. Haven't really been able to interview them about that, but I know they love it.
Now we have run in.
So do you shred it up
you sort of tear it up before putting it in?
Oh, to some degree, yeah. We
To
don't
some
just throw the
degree.
whole thing in.
But even laying a whole pizza box over the top, they love that too, because they like to get underneath that. And it provides them more protection from light, which they can't have. They'll die in the light.
Yeah.
So we have also put in even things like a compostable kitchen scrubber, but then, you know, maybe only part of it is compostable. And so that'll go in there. And after a while, the compostable type part is gone. And so we'll pull out the part that's not going to break down.
Yeah.
And similar with like some of the cups and things we put in, most of it will break down, but then we'll be left with some kind of plastic coating. So then we'll try to remove those
Yeah,
as
we
well.
sort it carefully when we take it out of there to get rid of the stuff that the worms couldn't eat or it didn't decompose.
And
that's-
we've certainly seen things that are called compostable can take really long, you know, like some of the compostable utensils. And even we've come across some material that was supposedly compostable that just was taking a long time.
Sure.
So there's, you know, there's some issues like that you might run across.
Right. Anything with some vegetable things you're going to have, like avocado skins or something, they take just longer to break
Or
down.
avocado pits.
Yeah, well, I don't put those in.
Wine corks.
Wine corks, there's another one.
It takes
Again, aren't you ever going to break down?
right.
So then you just dump it in and feed them?
Yeah. So yeah, we would generally, we do like that. And there's a good example of a compostable scrubber right there.
So I'm going to come in closer because something's unique about this.
Oh, yeah.
And that it has two bays.
It does.
Yes.
You have two bays. So what is the purpose of that?
Well, the idea, you know, you mentioned earlier when we were talking about, you know, timing. So basically, ideally is we fill up one side, we let it get composting with the worms, and then once that's really full, we stop putting stuff in there, and then we move and start putting things in the other side. And, you know, somewhere along the way, as we are almost filling or fully filled this side, the other side is fairly composted at that point and pretty usable.
And the worms are gone because the worms have migrated because they can migrate through the slats here and get into the other half. So that by the time that side's composted, there's no more wonderful goodness in there for the worms. And they've all moved over to the fresh food over on this side.
Very nice.
So the only stuff we have to sort through is the remaining bits of plastic that we take out and throw that away. And then the rest is wonderful compost and no worms. Almost no worms.
And I also see that there's a heavy mesh around it, and that I assume is to stop vermin from invading. And that probably is why you can put fish scraps in there also, because that's helping keep bigger vermin from out there.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up. You know, if I may, I might say a little more about that. So these two bins, this one here and there's another one around the corner, we bought on Whidbey Island, and we were told that the way to use them was to bury them about 1 foot into the ground. And they didn't have the mesh. And so for a number of years, I don't know what I was, maybe 3 years, that worked just fine without the mesh and with them buried down there. But then guess what? We did start getting vermin digging in from underneath, coming in.
Voles and mice.
And so we went, oh gosh, all right. So we dug them out and we put the mesh on the bottom and around the sides. And that, for the most part, you know, keeps things out. You know, it can be still sometimes challenging, but it's way better than it was without the mesh. Yeah.
Very good. And how often do you raid the bin? Or how often do you get? What's the turnover time for?
About 6 months, I'd say.
Right. Yeah, and I've read some places that some people get like as quickly as 3 months. Yeah, I don't think we get it that quick.
No.
But 6 months.
Okay.
And boy, you know, related to that, we have really noticed. So these berries right here, you know, it's pretty wild. I would say it's easily double what it used to be. And so we're pretty convinced that having these 2 worm bins right by these berries has made them infinitely more productive. And then the same with our raised beds. We got really good production out of our raised beds after we started putting more of the worm compost. And go
Can I
ahead.
talk about the biochar?
Yeah, I was going to ask if you add anything to the compost. So this would be a good time to say how you do that.
Yeah, I'm gonna just pop this so it stays open. Okay. So yes, I've been adding biochar that I've been buying at Island Lumber. They have this for sale at Island Lumber. And
just stand behind you.
okay.
Make sure.
And so I make sure to get, you know, not a lot. He doesn't need much, but about that much. Maybe it was about, I don't know, a gallon maybe of biochar, a partial bag. And then I don't mix it in or anything. The worms do a good job at that. But I think this has made an incredible difference in the quality of the compost. I'm really sold on it.
Yeah. And what sort of differences do you say? I mean, in the tilth or in the nutritional value of it, or in what way?
The growth of the plants is phenomenal. Just absolutely amazing.
I mean, you know, for example, we were growing potatoes, and honestly, we weren't making an epic effort at it. We were trying to grow them, and they were not so productive, really. But this year, oh my gosh, they really kicked in.
Nice, nice.
And I think that was mostly due to the worm compost and the biochar.
Yeah. Well, worm castings themselves are incredibly good fertilizer. So when you have all those other organic materials in there working, it's a nice combination. And what ratio do you mix this with your garden soil or whatever to when you're making up a planting mix?
We don't use it to make up a planting mix. We just take it out and just lay it on the top of
On the
the
top,
garden.
you just top. Okay.
Top dress. We just top
Okay.
dress.
Yeah, I would say most of, I mean, correct me if I'm missing something. Most of what we do in relation to this, it's not like there's a scientific formula we're following. It's kind of laissez-faire. You know, we put the stuff in, it composts down, we put it in the raised bed or somewhere, and it seems to work pretty good without us having to pay a real strict attention to a formula or something.
Yeah, well, that's finding a common theme on Vashon. People really sort of want easy composting, and so they're not necessarily trying to follow. Ken Miller is very precise in measuring like that, but I take Sheila Brown, and she's the opposite. She just likes making compost, and she doesn't want to know so much about the science. And but she's actually, what she's doing is actually quite scientific. So she's also adding kelp to her current batch and things like that. So all of these are things that people are paying for in packaged fertilizer.
So I would just like to mention something about the biochar. Unlike the organic matter that people add to their compost, biochar doesn't decompose. You never have to add more because this will last for hundreds of years. And the reason it works so well is because the microorganisms have wonderful, it's like high rises for microorganisms. and they have these wonderful homes inside this porous material. And once you get those microorganisms going, they absolutely love it and they'll hang in there.
Yeah.
So can I add to what you just said? You want to hold this a second?
Sure, I'll hold it.
Yeah, I would add that just your worm bin being in contact with the soil also allows the introduction of natural microorganisms. This is a very dense garden, so there's trees close by, so you have a complete ecosystem sitting underneath this that is sort of helping that balance. And it's one of the reasons I've read that it's not a good idea to put a worm bin on a cement or any sort of platform, though I see it done. It's generally not recommended.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah. So I was just going to mention, related to the biochar, this book. You know, this is a great book on composting. It's simple. It's about 20 years old now. And one of the things I found a little bit entertaining in here is they said, oh gosh, whatever you do, don't put charcoal in your compost because it's not going to break down. And so, I read that. I went, oh my gosh. Well, yeah, that's right. It's going to hold on. It's going to stay around a long time. But now we know, as we've learned about biochar in the last 10, 20 years, that can be a good thing, as Diane was talking about.
Yeah. Well, it's an ancient knowledge that is coming back to light, and it's very beneficial to the soil and creating a good habitat for microorganisms. So we like it. Well, let's take a peek at the other compost bin. It's in the sun here, but I'm going to stop for a moment and switch over to that. So now we're at compost bin number 2. This one is active and working, and going to show us some worms and see what's inside. So
Okay, so if you zoom in there, you can probably see a bunch of worms there wiggling away, and there's a big patch of them.
Can you see that?
yeah.
Very happy worms.
And did you have to seed this with worms, or did they find you?
Initially we seeded. I bought some.
I had some as well. So it was both, really. I had some worms. Diane brought some in.
Because these are special worms. These are red worms.
Yeah, I
not
know.
garden
For some
worms.
reason, we just put the bin down. It was just supposed to be for a cup, and the worms came.
The red
We
worms
didn't.
are cool.
They just showed up,
Oh, there you go.
Oh, that's interesting.
and they're
Yeah,
There's
boy,
another,
that's so
there's another
nice.
big batch of them.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's oops, this is. But yeah, I have no reason why. But yeah, they're red wigglers, and they showed up, and it's like, thank you very much.
Oh, that's cool.
But this sort of shows this is in process here, and this is just shows you've got garden fruit bins
Yeah,
and
we've got paper,
paper and
Yeah,
Like
cardboard
coffee.
packaging and stuff.
some
Underwear.
underwear.
Organic cotton underwear.
okay.
It all breaks down.
And do you expect that within 6 months will disappear?
I
Well,
think,
it
except
might
for
take a
the
little- the
except for the
elastic.
elastic, I think it likely will.
Yeah, and whatever doesn't, if it's still not composted, we just put it in the other bin and give it another 6 months. And that's all.
And another thing in terms of maintenance that we do try to pay attention to is adding water. Now, a lot of times in our little compost container from the kitchen, there's water in there, or because we washed out a bottle or whatever. But if we, you don't want to let it get too dry, because then the worms won't be very happy.
Right. And you also want to keep it in the shade, out of the sun, which helps prevent drying. And the lid also helps prevent evaporation. We have not had ever to add water to ours, but so if you do add water, how much do you add? And is that just typically during a very dry summer?
Yeah.
Well, that other one, that first one we were at, we hadn't been adding much to that lately. We'd been, as you can sort of see, we've been adding most of our food scraps over here lately. And so that one, I recently just added this new mesh over there. So I looked at it and I went, wow, this is a little dry. So I added about a gallon of water.
Okay.
Because it just had been a while.
Yeah, and you had mentioned that you had picked up these bins on Whidbey Island. So is there are they still available source?
No, they've stopped making them.
Okay. And are they're made out of cedar?
Cedar.
And that's another thing. So one of the downsides of burying them obviously was that eventually the rodents could get in. The other thing, of course, because it was buried a foot down, it was starting to rot sooner. So we're of the thinking now that, hey, put the mesh on the bottom so the worms and bacteria can interact with the soil, but don't bury it.
Okay. Yeah, ours is just sitting right on the surface, and it seems to be fine. The worms disappear when it gets very cold out, and then they're right back as soon as it warms up. So, well, very good. This has been highly educational. One thing, if we could try to do here is a quick glimpse at the end result of the worms and the growing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we could show you this amazing
Yeah,
size of
around
some stuff.
Okay,
there's raised beds on the other side.
so I'm going to stop and follow you. So we are now looking over at the garden, and here we see a beautiful bed of nasturtiums.
Yeah, to just kind of give you an idea of how productive this is with the compost on it, is about a month ago we harvested. This was mostly potatoes, so it did a massive production of potatoes. Took them all out, and wham! It still had a lot of nutrition and energy to produce a massive quantity of nasturtiums right after that.
And they're huge.
Yeah.
The size of these leaves. Look at that. I mean,
Right.
that's just massive.
They're healthy.
And they're healthy this time of year. They're not full of aphids,
Right,
and they're not
right.
full of anything else.
Right.
Yeah.
Very nice. Well, thank you very much. This has been an informative tour, and happy gardening, and I hope that the worms keep on producing well for you.
They will. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Take care.
Okay. We have two threads of questions and comments that have developed in the chat. So I'll just pass that on, and somebody may want to comment more than what's been said. One thread started with Lavinia asking about what you can add to biochar to what kind of composting system. Ken's answer was that you can add biochar to any composting system. Ken also gave a search set of search terms to look up on the issue of biochar, biochar use in soil by David Yarrow, Yarrow. And Steve added in a comment about the fungi liking to inhabit the cellular structure of biochar. So those things can be looked at in the chat stream there. Also, Debbie had started a line of questioning about the bins being enough, the ones that we just saw being enough to produce compost for all of the garden beds. The answer was yes. It might be interesting to know what extent of garden beds we're talking about there. Diane also mentioned that they do supplement the compost that they make with something called humanure, which goes on their non-food plants. She also added that each of the worm bins, each side of the worm bins produces 20 gallons of compost. So there are a couple new questions that have shown up just at this moment, but maybe somebody would like to address those two threads on biochar and the quantity of compost that were developed during the talk. Anyone? No.
So Tom, are you looking for an answer or more questions?
Well, I guess what we don't know is an answer to the question of how much compost you used for your garden beds was the extent, the actual physical extent of all the garden beds on which you used the compost. Did you have enough? But was that for 100 square feet, 300 square feet, 50 square feet? Can you estimate the extent to which those bins were able to?
Yeah, so I guess it would be probably 50 by 100. Yeah.
So 500.
5,000
Yeah, 5,000 square feet. Yeah.
or 500 rather.
50.
No,
by-
yeah,
5,000?
50 times 100. Yeah, 5,000 square feet. That's a guess.
Okay. Anybody else want to address the biochar issue, or has enough been said? Okay. We do have a couple of questions that have cropped up just in the last couple of minutes. Question from David about the mesh wrap. Is it porous enough to let worm tea out? It looked like it might be, but we do have that question sitting there.
Yes, it is porous. It lets the worm tea out, which is the only problem with this system is that I don't get to collect the worm tea. It drains into the soil. So the worms can go into the soil as well if they need to stay warm on a cold day. And the berry vines around those worm bins benefit from the worm tea. Tremendous production.
Okay, and Will, I should add, has added a link to David Yarrow's site, or something about him, so you can find that in the chat as well. And I should add that the chat streams will become part of the videos that are available online. Correct, Will?
Yes, correct.
That's it from the chat at this moment.
Oh, question from Jerry. Jerry, hang on. We need you to unmute.
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you. It was mentioned not to use citrus in the composting. I do. What is the theory for not using citrus?
That was specifically for worm bins and not for general composting.
Ah, okay,
And that's because some worms don't particularly like citrus.
sure. Okay, got it. Thanks.
And Debbie had asked a question, so if you're getting ready to build your own bins, worm bins, the ones that we just saw are about 5 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet, and I assume that encompasses both sides.
Yes, I'd say that's about the right size.
Okay.
They're pretty good sized. And we put in our garden waste in there as well, not just scraps from the kitchen.
Oh. So all your garden waste goes in there as well.
Not all the garden waste, but a lot of it. Oops, a lot of it when we're weeding. Those nice soft plants that we've pulled out with some soil on them, they get piled in there. And woody stuff can go in there. It takes longer to break down. We just put it all in, and it all breaks down over time. The worms don't seem to mind whatever we put in there. They take care of it.
And if you're really interested in about worms, then Jeannie has added a pitch for a book by Amy Stewart on the remarkable achievements of earthworms. And I assume this is the same Amy Stewart who produced this also very entertaining book on the drunken botanist. Is that the same author, Jeannie? I'll assume it is.
So I'm going to put in the chat also an additional resource. At one point, we did have a vermicomposting farm actually on the island, run by Mark Yelkin. And he still has the website up. Yeah, he was known as the worm guy. And if you're interested in finding out more information about worm composting on Vashon, he can tell you a bit about it. And if you want to start a business here, boy, I would love to see it.
I think I saw, Ken, you had your hand raised. Okay, you'll have to unmute. There you go.
Okay, the question that I think Michael had when he was reading the book about charcoal, I think the author was referring to charcoal briquettes. That is a no-no. That is not, it's full of volatile oils and other components, and it will not do well.
Yeah, that actually has coal dust in it.
Yes. And it, yeah, it's not good. Don't use that stuff.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah.
I have a sort of a little story, I guess, that might be pertinent. My mom always had a mulch pile. She was a wonderful gardener, and she used to take the ashes from the fireplace. So if they would have a wood fire, then she would take the ashes and add them to her mulch pile, which I think generally worked okay. And I know that's not the same thing as biochar, except one day when I was a kid and riding bikes down the street with my friends, and they said, all the fire trucks are at your house, Nancy. And so we went racing back, and our garden shed had completely burned down. And we think that it was because the ashes that had been recently added to the mulch pile were perhaps not completely cooled off. So little, I don't know if it's possible with biochar. I don't know much about biochar, but I would caution everyone to make sure you don't add hot things to your compost pile.
In general, that's very, very good advice. Whether wood stove, fireplace, whatever, the ashes should go into a metal can that is completely isolated from any combustible. And biochar can be quenched. It can be, have a water bath to assure it is like it. But that's not an uncommon tale. And there's been some beautiful historic homes that have burned down for exactly. Matter of fact, I think it was last year in Connecticut, a beautiful home burned down for exactly that, for fireplace ash that was dumped outside and not watched. Ashes are very good for a garden. We dump our wood ash onto beds, but with a couple caveats. You don't put them on acid-loving plants. So they're not good for rhododendrons, blueberries, or other acid-loving plants. Contrary to that, our lavender and lilacs absolutely love them.
We have a follow-up on from Marianne about whether the wood ashes would be okay in a really big compost pile if it's very cold out.
I don't know if it would change anything from a microbial standpoint. So I don't feel capable. I think I would probably add them post and mix them in with the compost afterwards as opposed to in the compost.
Okay.
So, Tom, do we have any final
Nope.
questions? Oh, we were going to talk about amendments.
Yes, that is, if we're at the end of this, then yes, there was a outstanding thread to discuss amendments.
Right.
And in a related way, somebody asked about the process for grinding up charcoal, if you had made it from bones or whatever.
So amendments are not necessary. There are different ways of making compost. And as I had indicated, I think the last session, there's a new train of thought for making fungal compost, which has a lot more mycelia in it. And that is so far proving to be using a different process. It actually is very complete for getting nutrition to the plants. There's no harm in adding amendments to the compost, though. And some inert things like biochar are beneficial regardless because they are essentially creating a structure for fungal and bacterial colonies in the soil. And so it's just a win-win situation. Now, Ken makes a super compost, and if you look at his video, he adds azomite and also things, and fish hydrosylate, and there's different ways they can approach it. If you're adding kelp, that's an amendment that has all sorts of mineral nutrients and is very beneficial. So as long as you're not putting anything toxic in there, it's not going to hurt anything to amend it. And how much you amend it or not, I think would really depend the state of your soil. If you have really good, healthy, rich garden soil, then regular compost alone can be good enough. But if you're building beds, then amending it really helps. I will say that one thing that's very impressive with Ken's garden is how well it retains moisture, and that's another benefit of using biochar. And if you have sandy soil like we do, using less water is actually really important and helpful. Well, Ken, you may have some more things to say about amendments.
Oh, yeah. You can actually go to the gravel pit and ask for their fines. I don't know if they charge it for it or not, but usually it's a waste product for making gravel. But I do add azomite rock dust as well as glacial rock dust. And let's see, what is it? From Cascade Minerals down in Central Oregon. Basalt, that's what I do. Add basalt sometimes. I'm looking for nutrient dense product, and the healthier the soil, the better the plants. And that's what I I'm with a group that's mostly in Port Townsend area, in Olympia, Chehalis. And they're really into that nutrient dense food, nutrient dense healthy soil. So that's what we do. We add minerals to it. So
Yep. One thing, there's a wide variety of types of soils we have to deal with on the island. And some people have gravel pits, some people have sandbanks, and some people have clay beds. And if a clay can seem like it's a nightmare, but actually one of the benefits of that is that it's incredibly finely ground rock dust. And it is actually mineral dense. The glacial till that came down to here, traveled long distance. A lot of it had volcanic rock into it. So we found at the Waste to Garden site that the mineral content of the soil was actually quite high. And so I didn't focus on that. But in our sandy soil, I have been adding minerals, and I am doing some experiments now with azomite to see if I can come up with a notable difference.
We have a
Sorry.
I was just saying, we have a question from Marianne here about whether wood chips are available on the island, either, I suppose, episodic basis, or is there a place you can reliably get wood chips when you need them?
No.
Okay.
It's a challenge. The tree cutting company, Asplund, sometimes will drop them off at your place. You can get them through the middlings, but they have what's called hog fuel or hog run, and that I have found is actually the opposite of a good soil amendment. It actually is a real good weed deterrent. But if you can get, or anybody that's cutting down a nearby alder tree or other trees other than walnut, then if you get the sawdust from them, that is a really nice amendment. I would avoid cedar. That's the only sort. Cedar and walnut would be the two that I would avoid. So follow your favorite woodcutter or arborist.
I have
Steve?
an idea there too. There's a website called getchipdrop.com. I've put it in the chat. And that is a website where you can sign on to have arborists drop off wood chips at your place when they're in the area, and so they can drop them off instead of having to pay to get them off island.
And is this Vashon specific?
It can be. You put your address in and you say, this is where I want chips. It's a much broader website, but yeah, it's what do I want to say? It works for Vashon. It works just fine here.
And Steve,
So can I just jump in? I am familiar also with that website, and I would read it carefully because you have to be available for whenever the arborist has the product, and you have to have a spot for it, and you sort of have to take whatever they've got.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, so in terms of using it for pathways or under trees or whatever, I think it works fine. If you're trying to use it to make compost, we do have a lot of cedar trees here on the island, and you could end up with cedar, wood chips that are dumped in your driveway. And if you're planning on using it for compost, that might not be ideal.
Absolutely. I would not use this for compost, but boy, is it great for mulching and weed suppression.
Yeah.
Steve Bergman has mentioned, I believe, somebody on the island, Michelle Ramsden, as a possible source. I guess we could ask Steve if he knows if by working with Michelle, you can be sure that cedar chips are excluded from whatever you get.
Yeah, I was also going to mention that be really careful about the provenance of the wood chips, because there could be all sorts of nasty things in there besides cedar. There could be lots of seeds, weed seeds, and other things that you might not want to be adding. But Michelle will tell you exactly what she's been grinding up. She's one of the local arborists on the island. She's in the phone book, and or if you just Google her, you'll find her. and she just tried to find a place to drop them off last week when she had some extras, and I think she ended up finding a place. But yeah, she'll occasionally have them.
Thank
As
you,
well,
Steve.
other arborists too on the island.
Thank you, Steve.
Actually, I'll give you a little background on Michelle's wood chips. The reason she recently purchased a big chipper, so she will come to your place and chip your wood too for you. So she's unlike the other arborists. I think she's special in this regard.
That's good to know. Back to additives. From a couple of our previous sessions, people were adding comfrey and nettles, or a tea made of comfrey and nettles. And those seem to be specific amendments. I'm just wondering if we have folks on here that do that. I think you do, Ken. What specifically are you getting from those?
Oh, you're getting comfrey. You're getting some minerals from deep in the earth. They have tap roots that can go down like 12 feet. So you're mining some really good benefits from the earth. Nettles, that's just another amendment that I make. Well, in combination with the comfrey, makes a beautiful juice the way I do it. It's about a half a cup per gallon is what I use in my sprayer. And I spray the plants as well as the ground with it too. And I've had good luck. I haven't had as many pests in the past as I've had in the past, rather. And it's I just kind of watch what nature does. So that's what I do.
Okay, thank you.
I should add that Michelle's phone number has now been added to the chat stream. So if anybody wants to contact her about wood chips, you can do that.
I'm going to show a picture here. Somebody asked about what kind of burners I have, and I don't know if you can see that or not. That's my 1 gallon and my 7 gallon stoves. If you notice, there's no smoke. No smoke at all.
And you use those to make your biochar?
Yep, I sure do.
Okay. Thank you. So we are a little past time now, and Tom, if we're petering out on the questions, I think we should probably wrap it up.
I think we've covered everything that was asked. If anybody thinks we missed a question of theirs, now would be the time to speak up. Otherwise, I think we're clear.
Or if you have future questions, you can always contact us at info@zerowastevashon.org. We're happy to entertain questions and or learn if you've discovered something new.
Yeah, and do please check that same website. We have a lot of good information accumulating out there about compost, in addition to recordings of the past 2 sessions, and this one will also be out there in a few days. There's a link to YouTube, and that's where you actually view the video, but that is also on our website. So thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. We hope this inspires people to try composting or enhance what they've tried. And we love to hear from you at Zero Waste Vashon. If you'd like to get involved in the work that we do, please also reply to or send an email to info@zerowastevashon.org, and we will get in touch. And we hope to do more of these, possibly. We haven't quite, this is the end of our current series, but if we find that there are more methods out there that we want to profile, we may do additional. So stay in touch. And thanks so much for spending part of your Saturday with us. Right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Will. Great job.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Will. Great job on the videos.